Thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Wilson.
And I'm Chris Ehmke.
And this is Diesel Performance Podcast. Chris, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsors over at WC Fab. We've been working with the Whirly Boys for, a long time.
Forever.
The reason that we always are working with them is because they provide superior parts and excellent customer service.
Exergy Performance, we talk about them all the time. They're pretty much a part of every high-performance build, or even the resto projects that we do, where we kind of revive an older truck and give it a new life, whether it's stock fuel system or modified fuel system. They're a great group of guys to work with. Customer service, that's also something, Paul, we talk about it over at CPS often, as that's kind of like a main staple for our business. I want to give a shout out, to Exergy. We've had a couple trucks recently where we're sending injectors out to have them tested, right? Something so simple. Guys are chasing their tail, trying to figure out how to diagnose something, and they're at wit's end. They don't know what, so they send the injectors out. And Exergy is really quick with turnaround times on stuff like that. Plus, they give an explanation and photos of like, hey, this is what's going on. So it really gives you a little bit more closure when you've been battling issues with a truck for 6 months and you don't know what the heck's going on.
It's one thing to have a nice customer service rep answer the phone, but to have an expert answer the phone and be able to explain something, that's really crucial. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I love working with XDP. They have actual enthusiasts on the phones. They have people who are a part of the diesel community working there. You can call there. They're probably open. They probably have the longest operating hours out of anybody we work with. But they're a phenomenal group of guys with an extensive catalog. So if you're looking for anything for your truck, definitely check out XDP.
And then you have our shop, Calibrated Power, right?
Hey.
Longest running sponsor. Thanks, Nick. Customer service is kind of in our nature, right? We understand that that's the foundation of our business. I mean, our customer service, I think, is so great. We have customers from other companies calling us looking for help and assistance. So, we appreciate it all, guys. But shout out to Nick and everything he's offered for his sponsorship with us.
Absolutely. For today, guys, we got a great episode put together. We're going to be talking with our guest. He's had a third-gen Cummins. He's had some upgrades. He's had some issues. I think he's really gotten the full spectrum of the DIY experience, so we're going to love to talk with him. Colin King, how the hell are you?
I'm doing good. How about you guys?
No, we're doing good. We're glad to have you on. You and I have talked a little bit behind the scenes about doing a podcast like this with your experiences and stuff. So thanks for carving out some time to be on here.
Anytime.
All right. Well, Colin, we always get our guests started by kind of getting our listeners familiar with you. Why don't you tell us, how'd you get your start in diesel performance?
Well, we're going to say my grandpa kind of screwed me over getting me into cars when I was back in high school. Restored an old 65 Plymouth Satellite.
Ooh.
And it's been a fun treat, but that stayed stock. And then my dad had a business. Basically had an 06 Cummins, same thing as I got. Things started going wrong with it, so we did a few small upgrades that probably made 450, 480 horse. And it was just fun going out on the street, of course, beating Camaros, Mustangs. And that truck got wrecked when I was in high school, and about 2 years ago, I was able to buy my 06, and it's been a downfall from there of just spending money.
So you had said you said you'd modified your dad's a little bit, 450, 480 horsepower, respectful in its own right. When you got your hands on yours, 2 years ago, what did you do right away? Did you do anything right away? Did you drive it for a little bit stock? Like, walk us through some of the first upgrades you did to that thing.
I actually went up to Wisconsin and bought it. Was kind of not a thing I was planning on buying. I was, I want to say I was an auto trader one night, and I happened to come across the red Dodge. It's the color I was looking for. It was a Laramie with the four-wheel drive on the floor, and I didn't want it as a shifter knob on the dash. I didn't want something going wrong. And should have known as a diesel, something's always going to go wrong. Ended up, it had a super chips on it, so I drove that for a little bit, for probably about maybe 6 months, and I called Chris about tuning. And of course, like every diesel guy, you got to stock trans, but you tell them, you got to build trans. I knew I was going to build a trans eventually. Just not as soon as I was hoping for. I ended up putting a trans in it, I want to say 3 months down the road. Reverse and all gears went to neutrals going down the highway one time. And of course, I was 2 hours away from home, so I had to call a buddy to pick me up, and ended up getting a fire pump comp 1 for it. And ended up having a few issues with that, but it's all ironed out now, and it is actually a comp 2, so all billet shafts and ready to finally handle some horsepower.
I love this idea here. So you get the truck, it has a tuner on it. You're like, yeah, sure, I'm going to drive this for a little while. It's already tuned. I'm good. Super chips on there, probably threw 40 horsepower at it or whatever. But your first instinct is like, man, I've had this thing 3 months. Let's get custom tuning. Yeah. And the honesty about, like, I'm going to tell them it has a built trans and just run it till she don't run. That's so common.
That's very normal, right? It comes to one of two things, right? And Colin, no offense or disrespect in any way, but you get the younger group of guys where it's like, my trans is the exception. My trans is going to stay together. And then you get into an older guy who's been down that path. They've already learned from the younger, my truck is invincible. No. Just keep the stock trans intact. I don't want to hurt it. I don't want to push it.
It's the optimism of youth, I like to call it. Yeah, the optimism of youth of, like, I'm going to be responsible enough to handle this much power and not fuck shit up. And I've never known that to work.
I mean, dude, I'm thinking about myself in my old second-gen truck, and like it felt like it was yesterday. It was 12, 14 years ago.
Yeah, because you're old. Yeah.
I'm getting old, right? But we all go through it. Yeah. We all go through it in some fashion or another. So, Colin, you did the Fire Punk trans. It's a very common thing amongst the 47, 48 world, third gen, second gen Dodges. But it didn't stop there. You did some other upgrades along the way. So talk to us about some of the other things that you changed up over the course of, the last year of ownership after having the trans and the custom tuning in the vehicle.
Now, let's also say I didn't have the optimism of how long the trans was going to last. I knew it was going to go. It was just a matter of when. I was hoping it'd stay on a little longer than it did. But
we changed that phrase then. We call that planned obsolescence.
Yeah. Using big words, Paul.
But it's got a set of Longhorn Fab Shop traction bars on it, a Fast 165, all braided lines going to the trans. Of course, the fuel bowl delete. Then I want to say after I did all that, we threw a Stealth 67 on it, and I've driven that since, I want to say, last October until my now predicament, which we'll get into later down the road.
So,
and it was a fun truck. It made, I want to say it made 606 with a few tuning revisions. I want to say there was a little bit left in it, but I kind of wanted to leave it not pushing it, so
yeah,
I could, because I beat the living crap out of the truck.
It's a stock injector pump truck, has a lift pump, has a drop-in 67, built trans tuning. So the truck made 606 on Fire Punk's dyno, a few months back. So
that's rowdy. Yeah, for sure.
Now, Colin, I think the theme of this episode is going to be it just came a little too soon, right? Because about a year now.
That my marriage.
About a year ago, we had talked about doing some upgrades, and it was in the not in the not so distant future, but it was something that we were going to do over time, and the whole reason for this build or this project was that you could grow into it, right? Like you want to do some modifications, run it, do some more modifications, continue to use it, and not do like everything in one shot. What have you learned from that as far as, beating the hell out of the truck and planning the way you were?
I would say if you're going to beat the living crap out of the truck, from what I've learned, build the top end first. At least do head studs, springs, and push rods, because on stock injectors at 600 horse, it decided to stretch a head bolt, and we'll get into that issue.
Yeah.
And it's gotten into a further build than what I've told Chris yet, and what we've talked about. And
so
I would say definitely build the top end, make sure the truck can handle the power. So if you're going to beat the living crap out of the truck like I do, it'll handle it and take it for a long time.
I want to get into beating the hell out of a truck. Now, I have only heard diesel truck owners describe their driving habits as beating the hell out of it, or I'm the safest driver ever. Yeah. Nobody's ever like, hey, sometimes, I lean on it. So are you out drag racing and sled pulling? Are these competition? Are we doing rolling heaters on the highways? Like, what are we towing trailers that are way over capacity and running up a hill and passing people? Like, what constitutes beating the hell out of it?
Well, I do drag race every once in a while. This was the first year I raced ET with the truck, and I want to get into 770. But at a stoplight, of course, racing people. My girlfriend's kind of realized that, hey, if there's a car next to me and are starting to rev a little bit. Well, he's going to put it in 4-wheel drive and fucking and the funny part for me is the truck has a staging limiter on it, so it sounds like a two-step when I get on it. And the moment the two-step hits or the limiter hits, you just see the car next to you just kind of look at you like, well, I kind of got myself a little in too deep on this one.
Okay. I would call that regular abuse. Yeah, that's beating the hell out of it.
It's abuse.
And now, before the head gasket decided to go, we were having a few issues. It kind of sounded a little weird. Didn't stop me from beating the crap out of it.
What do you mean it sounded a little weird?
It almost sounded like it had a miss at idle. But it would drive absolutely fine. The miss went away the moment you took off. It was just something in my ear that I could hear. Nobody else noticed it.
Any guesses on that, Chris?
Oh, he'll tell you.
Yeah.
But we found out.
Okay. All right, Colin. So you start hearing a miss. That doesn't stop you. That's a turn up the radio miss. I get
it. Still banging the staging limiter at a red light. But
it was a fuck around and find out moment.
Okay. What'd you find out?
We'll say on the way to the lake, we were headed up to my lake place in Michigan. Guy on a motorcycle started to mess around with me, and of course I pulled away from him. And he pulls up next to me, gives me the thumbs up and everything. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Get up to the lake. Next day I run into town. I do probably a second gear roller. Just rolled into it. And the moment I let off, it let go. It was just missing. It was just nothing but black smoke behind me. And I was like, well, this is about to be a fun time. So I was like, well, we're going to be either head gasket, hopefully no motor. And, that kind of changed a little after we pulled the head off.
So let's backtrack a little bit. So Monday morning, I get a call. He wants to send the injectors out and have them tested. So how many calls would you say you and I had on that Monday, Colin? 4, 5 maybe, back and forth?
At least.
So he was under the assumption and the thought of like, hey, it's probably an injector. Like they were told that they were replacements. They should only have 30, 40,000.
I mean, all that would track. Like had a little sound,
yep.
Had a hiccup at idle,
exactly.
Like sound like a miss. All of a sudden, black smoke everywhere.
All backs into it.
You're like, okay, an injector's hanging open, like it happens.
So in conversation, I started bringing up because when I had my 07, I had similar things go on, right?
Yeah.
Well, I had cracked piston rings. Okay, I had 2 cylinders that were bad. So I asked him, do a compression test. Did you check any of this stuff out? No. So he did some of his due diligence, and he verified that the compression was okay except for one cylinder. And Colin, I'll keep that to us. We don't need to talk about how we figured that out, but he figured out that
we don't need anyone on the podcast calling you guys saying, "Hey, I did this exact thing and I messed something up."
Yeah, wait, what is? No, we do need this. What do you mean? Other people are going to be out there doing this either the right or the wrong way. Colin, how was your
DIY compression test?
How did you test compression?
If we're going to go into this and anyone listen to the podcast, do not do this. We knew one cylinder was missing. Well, we got a compression tester. For some reason, it wasn't reading right.
It wasn't compressioning.
So we thought we're like, all right, we just have to find the dead cylinder. So we decided to seat the injectors in and just fire it over. And if the injector decided to fly out, well, we have okay compression in that one. Let's move on to the next one.
The fuck did you just say?
Word for word what came out of my mouth when he said this to me.
The moment we got to 5, the injector didn't come out, and we're like, well, we found the issue.
So I judged hard, took a deep breath. It is what it is. Now
it's not the worst test I've heard.
No. Now at this point in time, though,
it's not good.
He was also on the phone with D&J, and he was giving D&J a little bit of a different backstory, using some coolant, some other stuff that he wasn't really sharing with me on my end. We didn't talk about that. So he calls me up and he's like, "Yep." After talking to D&J, we're pulling the motor, we're pulling the head. Right, we're going to pull the head. And what happened on that conversation?
Well, pulled the head, ended up finding out it blew the head gasket between 6 and 5 and 4 and 3 or 5 or 4 and 5, and it was completely gone. Looked at the head, it torched the head. It looked like someone took an acetylene torch to it.
So
from 4 to 6.
The 5 and 6 is where it's really bad. Yeah. So it actually took out like an eighth of an inch of material off the head and the block, which now it's no longer just a head gasket. It's no longer a head and a head gasket. It's a block. It's a head. It needs everything.
Yeah. You're not planing that. Yeah.
And now, I didn't find out about the block. My friend felt the block later that day. He was like, okay, the block's good. And I'm like, all right, thank God. Well, I started cleaning up the block, getting the oil off the deck surface, and I start looking. I'm like, the block is not good. So the only people that were open at that time were industrial. I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what could happen. And they're like, it might be able to be milled. And I'm like, okay. So I knew the motor was going to have to be pulled. And after talking to D&J, sending some pictures to Chris, they're like,
not savable.
That's not something we would want to touch. It's not. It just, where you want to go horsepower-wise, it would not be safe to do.
Mm-mm.
Oof. Well, that's less funny.
It is less funny.
It's happened, though. I mean,
but we're talking from a Monday to a Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
He's thinking a head gasket. I'm ordering a head. We're going to get a set of 100s and a 12 mil, and I'm going to turn around in a turnkey 800-900 horsepower truck. I'm doing it all now. And then Tuesday it got a little bit iffier, and then Wednesday he's like, yo, man, pump the brakes. I need to do a motor now, right? Like that's an expensive week.
Yeah.
Right? And I've been through stuff like that in the past. I think we all have some type of a situation where you have a game plan, right? And it's, okay, this broke, it's time for upgrades. And then the next thing you know, when you assess the damage, you're like, oh, fuck, this $8,000 upgrade turned into $20,000, $25,000.
Yeah.
Just because I was banging rev limiter at a red light,
But did you win?
You got the thumbs up. That was the most expensive fucking approval ever. That thumbs up was everything.
My girlfriend told me if I ever lose, she's breaking up with me. So I have to win. If I start hearing a miss, I'm not lifting until I know he's behind me.
Oh, Colin, how long you been dating this girl for?
Oh, probably about a year or so.
Okay. Well, in a year or two down the road, whenever she starts hinting at, the big popping of the question, you then get to use this motor on her and say that this is her fault because she doesn't want you losing, and that's putting the ring off that much further.
I think you just should lose a race with her in the car. Just give you some life advice I don't usually give. They won't tell you this. I never met her. I'm sure she's a very nice lady.
Hey, listen, she's not expensive, which is very surprising.
She just cost you $22,000.
I was going to cost
What the fuck do you think is expensive? Oh, no, I'm just joking. I'm just joking to a very nice lady I've never met out there. I'm just playing.
I was going to build a 6.7 Ford anyways. I was going to be this deep anyways.
He was. There was a plan.
At some point.
He was at UCC this year, spent an hour and a half at the booth talking about what his game plan was and the different things. But once again, you plan for it down the road. Now it's all coming in one shot. It's just how it goes. So what's the new build look like? What are you going to utilize? How are you going to take advantage of the shortcomings here?
So there's A Squared Motorsports out of Idaho. I ended up making a post on Firepunk's Facebook forum, and all I was looking for was a block, and a guy ended up messaging me saying, hey, I have a block, pistons, rods, whole shebang and shaboodle, and basically was a price I couldn't say no to. So the motor now that's getting built is basically just a stock crank, but is, I want to say last week we ended up making the decision to girdle it too, because the whole rotating assembly is good for 2,000 horsepower, and I don't want to pull the motor down the road. The motor's already out. We might as well do the machining now for the girdle. It's only going to cost me $1,000 now, as I say, only.
Sure.
But it's easier to do it now than $6,000 down the road to pull the whole motor apart and do the machining for the girdle.
True.
So doing a 14 mil girdle at the bottom, got a set of Carrillo rods, set of industrial injection piston, fly cut and coated pistons. Motor has a 220-210 cam, and that's pretty much the motor side. And then we've got a D&J Stage 1 head coming for it.
Nice.
So you'll have a setup spec for 2,000 as far as the motor's concerned. What's the injector setup? Are you doing the 100s and the 12 mil?
I'm between that But right now, I'm probably leaning more towards doing 150s and a 14 mil. That way I can grow with it. The trans is only good for 1,000 right now. But, you know, I'll eventually probably pull that, throw bigger shafts in the input and output. And
it still has a 67 on there. So the idea, you know, it's clearly you see how this is spiraled. Like,
sure.
Don't limit you, go a little bit bigger. And we've talked about maybe doing compounds in the future, or maybe he just likes the big single and wants to go up to a bigger single. At least you have the fuel to grow into.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's probably going to say a decent size single on the manifold. I do like the drivability of the spool up. I might not always stick with the 67, might go to a little bit bigger S400 on the manifold later down the road, but I do want to keep the drivability. I'm not as being young as I am, I'm not a big single guy. I like the drivability and if I get on it on the highway, I like to have the power there, not just wait until 2 months down the road for the turbo to finally kick in.
Yeah.
What a rowdy story of getting a truck with the super chips and ending up here.
Built motor.
So you said you got some hopes of going into the 770s in the future. How much racing have you done?
I pretty much just started this year. That's the one reason I wanted a diesel, wanted something I do have a lower, my first truck was a 1500 that's lowered, and there's not much I can do to it other than we're going to back half it and put a stroke 6.1 Hemi in it with a Pro Charger and a T56, but that's another story. But I wanted to be able to go drag race in the truck and have a good streetable race truck that I could drive on the street and have fun with.
No, I mean, using the truck in a multi-facet, you know, it sounds like this is like, well, it was your daily driver until now, but you have that, once you get the motor in there and everything, you could still use the vehicle in a multi-facet operation, you know, which is cool with the versatility of these things. I don't know if there's a lot of gas engines. I mean, maybe these days with the newer technology where you can make 1,000 horsepower turnkey vehicle and have it be streetable. Yeah. And at least in the diesel, you can still get the mileage and the comfort out of it.
And of course, I'm getting crap from my grandpa. He's like, this is why I've never liked diesels. They're this expensive. I'm like, listen, if you were going this much power on a gas motor, you'd be in the same price.
You know,
and he's like, no, you wouldn't.
I've done a big block. Yep. I've done an LS. I've done a 4-cylinder. I've done diesel. They all cost the same fucking amount when it's all said and done. Yep. There is not one route that's cheaper than the other, and I burnt myself on that so many times.
Well, there's also it's a very different world doing like an LS build than doing a diesel build. Like, it's a very different vehicle at the end of the day.
It's
you drive your car into the parking lot, your gasser, and it's borderline obnoxious at best. It's not that it's not cool. It is cool.
The cam straight pipe sound.
I
get it.
Borderline obnoxious. Yeah, I mean, driving for 45 minutes back and forth. Like, if you had
it's
10 times the commute you have, you would be like, oh no, this is a weekend warrior. Whereas with a diesel, you could be in that power range or that price range, and you can set it up to where you're like, oh, I actually enjoy driving every day.
And there's things like, you know, when you talk about the gas stuff, like, you know, you could make the exhaust quieter and you could do that type of stuff. But the one thing that in Colin's and your grandpa's end, you know, I've looked at, I'm going to build a 4-cylinder motor, right? Rods, pistons, so cheap. There's four cylinders. Sure. It's cheap, right? And then you look at everything else. Or you look at LS stuff, right? And it's, LS injectors are cheap, rails are cheap, LS motors aren't expensive. It all adds up. You're going to spend money in other areas that the other platform, you know, diesel, for example, you really, you know, you don't have like fuel rails that you buy. You know, you have an injector, and then you have a lift pump to support that. Where, you know, in the gas world, it's like, oh, well, you don't need a lift pump. Well, yeah, you need a fuel system. You know, it's just worded differently, and it costs 2x the cost. So I think bang for your buck, $1 per horsepower. If you're going to build an 800-900 horsepower truck, I mean, granted, you know, for Colin, he's into it a motor. Right. I think it's cheaper to build a 1,000 horsepower truck than it would be a freaking gas car.
Oh man, any gassers out there listening right now, get on to Fans of Diesel Performance Podcast Facebook group. Call Chris a fucking liar. He just called Colin's grandpa a fucking idiot. So I mean, go after him. Wow. Get him all you want.
That's so aggressive.
Hey, my grandpa can be sometimes. Me and my buddy had a rear end in my truck within probably 45 minutes. My grandpa comes out 2 hours later and is dead serious. He's like, "Are you guys done with that yet?"
Wow.
Didn't say a word, looked at it. We're like, well, we've been standing here for about an hour and a half. We've been done a long time ago, and he not a word, just looked at it and walked inside.
That just sounds like he's jealous that you're out here living the best life, banging two-step at a red light, and he didn't have that.
Oh man, Colin, what a blast! If there's one question I could ask you, I guess it's going back over your history with this truck. You've had to go through a lot of different diagnostic steps and a lot of different issues to diagnose at different times. What do you think you would share? What advice would you share with somebody who's new to this world about diagnosing problems in their vehicle?
All depends on what's wrong with it and what issue you're having with it. Is the biggest thing to find out how to start diagnosing the issue. There's a lot of different ways to diagnose issues, such as if you're not getting fuel or air, and me, such as head gasket issues and now a motor. There's a bunch of different ways to diagnose stuff, and honestly, with my experience, call a trusted company that you trust and have them point you in the right direction of how to start diagnosing your issues.
I like that. I think that's a good one right there. Is find an expert, find a company you trust, find somebody you trust, lean on them for their expertise. Don't jump into it, diagnosing shit off the forums. Replacing your oil with water will not give you more RPMs, right? So like there's it will, but you shouldn't don't do that.
Wow.
I guess that's our overall point. Awesome. Well, Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute blast to talk with you. Listeners, go ahead, please.
I will say there is one flack I still get from my buddies is that the truck still has a muffler on it.
I think that gains street credit.
I like being able to drive down the highway without having a drone in the truck.
I think you found the one thing you haven't been able to break yet, and I give no doubts that you'll find a way.
Well, now that you said something, you already put bad luck in. Now it's probably going to break or fall off going down the highway, and now I'm going to wonder why my truck got so loud and notice my whole tailpipe down.
I would
blame Paul. Blame your girlfriend.
I would blame Paul, and I would send him a bill for the replacement.
You can send that to cmke@duramaxtuner.com. Guys, for today, this has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Ehmke.
Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for joining us today, guys. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Ehmke.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
About 2 years ago, I was able to buy my 06, and it's been a downfall from there of just spending money.